Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Coffee Talk, Technology and the Treasurer, How to Achieve Seamless B2B Payments with our host, Jon Paquette from TIS, and guest John Kluza from the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Before I get started, I have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to mention. First, this session should last about 30 to 45 minutes and will conclude with a Q&A session. We absolutely love questions, so please feel free to be sure to ask yours in the Q&A box in the control panel to the right of your screen. If you if you ask a question and we don't get a chance to answer it, we'll be sure to reach out to you after the session. If you have any issues or technical problems, please put them in the chat box and I'll be sure to answer those. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded and we'll send you a link after the session. Now I'll pass this over to John and John for quick introductions, and then we can dive right into the session.
All right, thanks very much, Jen, and thanks everybody for joining today. I'm Jon Paquette from TIS. I lead our customer success function for the US market, which is really our customer onboarding function, pre-sales function, and some of our partner engagement functions as well. So joined TIS back in 2019, but really all my experiences as a Treasury practitioner directly. 15 years experience working directly for Treasury organizations before making the jump over to the technology side. So thanks very much again for everybody for joining today. During the course of the conversation today, we're going to try to cover a couple of different topics here. So, first overall, the role that technology is playing in finance these days, and really the corresponding evolving skill set that finance professionals need to have in order to be successful in those positions. Also, why there's a lot of benefit for organizations and individuals for embracing this really, both professionally and to benefit your organizations as well. And thirdly, some strategies and things on how to build this knowledge if you don't already have it already, or also how to supplement this knowledge really if you don't have it internally within your organization. So with me today is John Kluza. He's the group treasurer for International Fund for Animal Welfare. I've known him for, I think, about a year now, as we kind of helped IFAW through their payments automation and bank connectivity initiatives alongside an ERP rollout that they're doing. He's one of the most technologically savvy treasurers I know in terms of, knowing his stuff around bank connectivity, file formats, reporting, systems integration, and things like that. So from that standpoint, he's a perfect guest speaker for our session here today, and I'm very happy that he agreed to join us. So I'll let John introduce himself here as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you guys for having me, and thank everyone for joining us as well. As John stated, I'm the group treasurer for IFAW. IFAW was International Fund for Animal Welfare. Give you a little background. It's a family of 16 international affiliated organizations, nonprofits, charities, and some corporates, working around the globe to improve conditions for animals, people, and the environment. So IFAW's been around for over 50 years. Our goals right now are preserving habitats, reducing human-wildlife conflict, combating wildlife crime, and protecting endangered species, most importantly, while supporting neighborhood communities. So that's one of the things that drew me to IFAW, was the fact that it was, I guess it wasn't simply animal focused. It takes a sort of a broader view, understanding that like everything else in life, there's lots of stakeholders and you've got to work out something that works for everybody. I came to IFAW about 12, 13 years ago, and prior to that, I've been in treasury management over 25 years. Spent about 15, 16 years with HSBC, primarily in Africa. We were a majority-owned subsidiary, HSBC Equator, which eventually morphed into HSBC South Africa. So spent quite a bit of time with HSBC, then did a couple of stints when they actually moved to South Africa with Optum Bank. It was Exanti Bank at the time. It was a startup. Moved to Capital One for a year, really enjoyable year, working in their treasury infrastructure department, which was solely project management work on treasury systems and mergers and acquisitions. So great time there. Unfortunately, they sort of disbanded when the financial crisis, our entire department was let go. And that kind of, call it timing, but something came up at IFAW that time, and that drew me to here. So, I found that I've been able to use my treasury expertise to help IFAW along, and in a very global, challenging environment.
All right, thanks a lot, John. Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, so just as we get into the conversation here a little bit, it seems like more and more IT is just playing a bigger role in finance these days across multiple different organizations. You see that's the same thing through FP&A functions, AP accounting functions, whatever it might be, but also in treasury, right? So With this larger adoption of technology comes a completely different skill set. It seems like most individuals need these days to have to be successful in Treasury. I remember my first position in Treasury. I think the prerequisites from a system standpoint were like Excel, and if they had experience in a couple specific e-banking platforms, that was helpful as well. But now these days, most organizations have adopted some level of technology. They're somewhere on that sort of technology maturity model there, and they're really looking for individuals that can help them progress further along that, right, in that journey. And so knowledge in terms of technical topics like bank connectivity, Swift, ISO 20022 formats, BI reporting tools. I've even seen some Treasury departments start requiring some light programming knowledge as well to kind of help move things forward within those organizations. So definitely a trend I'm seeing within the industry for sure. And I don't know if you're experiencing something similar to, or kind of what you guys are looking for at IFAW these days.
Yeah, we are. And, looking, I guess, at Treasury in general, I think where technical can really help the Treasury team is really maybe 3 areas. First off, understanding the technical, the systems and the data and, everything that goes along with it. It helps you at the get-go to really design a better Treasury infrastructure. So, right at the get-go, think down the line, think what you're trying to do. Every Treasury is unique, as we know. So what works for one company probably won't work for another company. So you've got to look at your needs and then come up with a solution, a creative solution that is going to meet those needs. And by understanding the technology, what's out there, what's available, and even getting deeper down into things like file formats, and when you're selecting your banking partners, you can understand and talk to them and understand what they can provide, especially in a global environment. You're dealing with data from lots of different regions, potentially in lots of different formats. You want to make sure all that data can be easily assimilated into your Treasury systems. So by thinking up front and understanding what technology is involved, you can really, design a Treasury infrastructure that's going to work, and hopefully you're going to identify a lot of roadblocks and hopefully avoid roadblocks in the planning process. So, that's one huge thing. Using technology in your planning and development is going to help you eliminate a lot of issues down the line. Treasurers, Treasury personnel, Treasury managers, one of the things technology also helps you with is just dealing with data. I mean, you're dealing with vast amounts of data coming in nowadays, not like it used to be. They're coming in different formats. They're coming in from different countries. Treasurers are responsible. It's global now. It is, and not a lot of people are only limited to domestic Treasury operations. And even if they are, they're probably could be spread across states, countries, different banks, different formats, different banking platforms. Technology is understanding how technology works will help you gather all of that data in the most efficient manner. Understanding the communication channels where you're going to reach out and pull that data into, and then how you're going to use it. And so you got to get that data in. You've got to get it into your system. Then you have to manipulate it if you need to. And some, that's the purpose of some Treasury management systems and applications are to eliminate some of that. But again, you've got to get the information in there. You've got to somehow analyze the information, turn it into some usable information. And the quicker you can do that, the quicker you can make decisions and manage your risks. So, technology is going to help you get data. It's going to help you develop information and reports that are accurate, they're consistent, and that's really going to help you make decisions. And in the end, that's really what you're trying to do, is support decisions and making these decisions as quickly and effectively as you can.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of good points that I think are really fueling why most organizations are looking for technology to play a bigger role in Treasury these days. The complexity, right? Most organizations aren't just US based anymore, just domestic, most are international. And then there's also a lot to manage, a lot to digest for data on a day-to-day basis, right, in order to make good decisions like you mentioned before. And one thing I always thought is always driving Treasury's need to kind of drive automation within the department is the fact that Treasury teams are historically small, right? I think I've seen few Treasury organizations that are really more than 2 to 3 individuals at most, right? And so in order to really kind of effectively manage all those different variables and prepare the reports you need to, analyze the data at the level that you need to, monitoring multiple bank relationships across the globe, you really need technology. I mean, it's almost like a crucial asset, a requirement for most Treasury departments these days, it seems like.
Yeah, I agree. There's very few Treasury departments that I've heard of that are actually expanding. So, the mantra is always do less or do more with less. Sorry, I almost got that backwards. Whether it's, losing personnel or having to prioritize what your people are doing, anything that's repetitive and, churning data and analyzing data in a repetitive nature, if a system can do it, automate and get that out of the way so your people can focus on strategic, decision making and supporting the goals and the objectives of the organization versus spending time playing around in Excel trying to get data together into a useful report.
Yeah, exactly. More value-add activities is a big focus for most Treasury organizations these days. And I think the other big component that everybody's bringing up is security. I think everybody's recognizing that, automation, straight-through processing means a more secure process in general, right? So the better you're leveraging technology in that respect, the better, position that you're in from a risk mitigation standpoint as well, right? So big focus too, I think, from what we see. But you've also touched on a couple other really good points, I think, too, which is, Treasury's shift away from being this kind of historical operational type department, right? Just transactional, just processing wires and cash movements and, balance consolidations and investments and things like that on a day-to-day basis. Really automating more of that and getting to a point where they're doing more value-add activities. They're really, more strategically, I think, assessing cash positions and cash management strategies. They're leveraging data really efficiently to make, really good cash management decisions on a day-to-day basis. Everybody's talking about real-time cash visibility, right? So Treasury's trying to manage things really in real time these days, it seems like, right? And also trying to mitigate risks. New risks have come up, obviously, during financial instability and things like that have come up recently around counterparty risks with banks and, currency risks and things like that, that Treasury organizations are always trying to keep a really, really close eye on, right? So, and technology is really just making a lot of these aspects a lot simpler for Treasury as well. So you can see why it's becoming more of a necessity, so to speak, than a nice to have for most Treasury organizations these days, right? So.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. Yep.
Yeah. And so, we touched briefly, I mentioned, briefly at the introduction here that John, he has a huge knowledge, at least in the technology topics that we address on a day-to-day basis for TIS and payments automation type projects and things like that. John, I think you did a good job giving us kind of a sense of your background here, where you kind of started your career and how you kind of progressed through. But just more specifically, could you give us a sense of how you managed to gain so much knowledge on things like connectivity, systems integrations, payment formats, and things like that?
Yeah, sure. And a lot of it, and probably most of it, was really needs based, and part of those needs we discussed things like limited resources and support staff. So I've always fortunately been interested in the tech side of things. So I've always hated like black boxes and things like that. So I'm very uncomfortable not understanding a flow of information and how it's coming out eventually into a report that I'm using to make decisions. I've been lucky enough to be involved in almost my whole career, really, and just being involved in different projects that cut across different departments, expose me to different departments, and more importantly, to different systems. So even starting as a staff accountant way back when with HSBC, I think one of the first things I did was involved in was they were going from mainframe accounting system to a new Windows-based accounting system, and that was when Windows was brand new. So that was really my first foray into some real, digging down into the technology and trying to, figuring out how the system is calculating accruals and everything else. So that certainly kept me interested, and really things constantly come up when you're dealing in Treasury, or really, whatever your job is, there's going to be issues that come up and you've got to solve them, and technology is usually the tool that you can solve things with. So beyond that, one of the probably one of the biggest, I think, leaps, I guess, in my sort of tech expertise, if you want to call it that, came about working with Capital One. As I had mentioned, they had like a project management department, and I really recommend, everybody at any level in an organization take some project management courses. It's like a discipline or a logic. It's like math, I guess you can think of it as. It's just sort of a logical step-by-step approach to implementing or developing a solution. Capital One had a program with George Washington University for a certificate in project management. So while I was working there, I went through that program and got the certificate. And it's just, again, it's just invaluable. So besides the discipline of of the approach to managing projects, most projects are tech oriented. You're always going to be digging in, and it really gives you the tools to sort of understand and to communicate with the people of the various audiences and stakeholders in a project, and basically learning from them, as well as being able to explain things to them in technical requirements when you have to. So that, it was only about a year and a half I was with Capital One before they folded the department, but invaluable. And it's something I use every day, project management tools, not only just for project management, but just in work as well. So, aside from that, then it's really, as issues come up, you think, how can I solve this? What technology is out there that's really going to, help me to come up with a good solution? Reading lots of guides and manuals. Again, I am a little bit of a tech geek, so I don't mind, buying a book on Microsoft Visual Basic application or VB Script, JScript. I don't mind, reading those manuals and guides and taking what tidbits I can and applying them to daily activities. Really, helpful. I like to ask a lot of stupid questions to our IT people, and they're very helpful. If you have any people that you can learn from, ask them questions, get them involved when you're working on something. And of course, seminars, there are some seminars that are more geared, AFP and conferences like that. There's always going to be some more technical streams that you can sort of latch onto and learn some more there. And when you're really into the throes of it, or into in the weeds, you can always go to the internet and Google. I mean, there's lots of forums for specific things. VB Script, if you're trying to develop a solution. We had issues. We had a Swift server, and we had a lot of different files coming in from our banks that we were having trouble, managing the inward files. And so I just did a foray on VB Script. That was the first time I worked with VB Script, and we developed just basically a batch file that would parse through all these files and throw them into folders based on the category of so we can assign them to the people that need to see the files, and they get acted on, and not just buried in the mix. So just little things like that. It's something that might not take too long, but it's something you use every day after that. So it's a worthwhile exercise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you have that interest in learning it, there's certainly a lot of self-learning resources out there that you can tap into, whether it be the internet or the resources out there to kind of increase your knowledge in these particular areas. Obviously, hands-on experience is there's no substitute for that. Just kind of getting involved in projects and just seeing things from a real life basis there. But that suggestion around the project management course, I thought was an interesting one, because I agree with that 100%. I mean, that is a really valuable skill to have, and certainly adapts well to all these types of topics that we've been talking about today. And likewise, there are some great resources out there these days, some great other webinars out there from AFP and some of the others, Treasury thought leaders in the industry that help individuals not only gain knowledge, but also stay on top of how things are changing, right? Because things are constantly changing these days in the banking market with, APIs, instant payments, all these other kind of topics coming up more and more, right? So it's important to kind of stay on top of how things are evolving over time. So, but that was really helpful for sure. So, and then once you have all this knowledge, I guess there's a lot of benefits to it. You already touched on a lot of them, right? You can solve things organizationally a lot easier. You can look to technology as the solution for a lot of different problems. But I have to imagine it also helps a lot in the technology assessment stage. I guess when you're looking out for a software, or you're trying to find the right provider for a particular solution, if you know your stuff, you probably know all the right questions to ask as well, right, to the provider to make sure that they can actually, meet your needs as a business. So I have to imagine that's a pretty valuable thing to have as well.
Yeah, that definitely is, and that part of that kind of arises out of the planning. You're understanding technology when when you're setting your requirements and assessing your needs. Then you're designing the solution or the infrastructure, and at that point, hopefully you have a very clear idea of what you need from a vendor or product service provider, and then you can communicate your needs to them very clearly, concisely, and make sure that that they understand it, makes sense to them, and then as you're talking back and forth with them, hopefully what they say to you is going to make sense as well. But clarity around your requirements is just key, and technical knowledge really helps you get that clarity and understand how to communicate requirements and needs to stakeholders, to vendors or stakeholders if you're in the midst of a project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And then once you get into the actual implementation phase, I'm sure there's also some other benefits that you can probably draw from if you have that kind of knowledge, both in terms of the different parties you're going to need internally to kind of align in order to accomplish things internally during the course of an implementation, right? But also something that always struck me during our project was that our product is obviously SaaS, so it's just configurable by the user once you kind of learn how to use it, right? And I think that based on your technical knowledge, you're able to do so much on your own. Just once we kind of showed you how things work within the platform, just facilitating a lot of the connectivity and payment testing entirely on your own. Through your kind of understanding of how those topics worked, really. So it's nice in that respect too. You can kind of take control of your own project, I guess, and not be reliant on somebody else's knowledge to help drive things forward. So.
Yeah, it is, and that can become a balancing act. You want to let the experts do what they do best, but likewise, where you can pitch in or push things along quickly, it makes sense to do so. We're not project managers. We're Treasury personnel, so we do have other responsibilities and roles. But so you really have to balance to make sure you're not taking time away from something necessary to work on a project like this. But as long as you can balance it, it really does help move things along quickly. It makes the implementation smoother, and your banks as well as your vendors are going to appreciate it. Everyone's speaking the same language. They're aligned. They're moving forward in the together, and eliminating surprises. No one likes surprises when you're working on a project.
Yeah, so on that topic, I mean, maybe we talk a little bit about the technology pitfalls during a project, right? Like what are the things you kind of have to look out for during the course of a project to they could potentially sideline or kind of curb your progress in some of these projects that you're working on here. One that we see all the time is the need to really rethink, operational processes a little bit. It seems like organizations have a tendency to want to take what they're doing previously and adapt that to a new technology, which always isn't a perfect fit. And sometimes you can actually get to I think, better place, right? If you think about how the technology is best used, what it's meant to facilitate in terms of automation and controls, and you kind of leave the old world behind and adapt to new processes that I think are probably better for the organization as well. So that's one common one I think that we see quite a bit. But just curious what you see in terms of kind of pitfalls in these technology projects too.
Yeah, you know what? That's probably one of the biggest ones. I mean, disruption is a good thing when you've got a new technology. Really use it how it's intended. Most people don't upgrade every year or two, so it's there's usually been a lot of changes between the last time they may have implemented a system and the current one that they're working on. So you know what, maybe lead people, handhold, training, education, get them comfortable with viewing statements or looking for transactions online instead of printing a statement report or something like that. But there's just so many opportunities for efficiencies that you've got to make sure that everybody is thinking outside of the box. And communication across and with all your stakeholders is just huge. You've got to keep the end users, you've got to keep everybody involved. As you mentioned earlier, Treasury is just it's expanded. We're consultants across an organization. People come to us for risk management, not just for banking or foreign currency, but anything that requires sort of the risk management tools or the skill set that Treasury personnel have. So you just want to get everybody's input, and when people brainstorm, you start thinking about, well, you're right, this doesn't make sense. What if we did this? And you know what? Somebody else might have something that I totally never thought of, and it's 5 times better than what I was thinking of. So brainstorm and really think things through with people and look to make changes. Change is good.
Change is good. Yeah, it's tough for some people. It's tough to embrace sometimes, but yeah, change is always good for an organization, particularly when it involves technology and automation and better controls too. So yeah, and then I think the other thing is that, aligning those objectives internally, like you mentioned, across multiple different departments. Treasury really is that, almost consultant these days in terms of how to best access things like bank connectivity, execute payments. It's easy to think of these from the narrow scope of Treasury, but they are, broader organizational topics. And I think the projects that we see best executed are those that think broadly beyond, that scope into the entire organization. How can everybody leverage these types of tools, right? I think they both help with getting the most value out of the project, or even before that, selling it internally once you kind of align the benefit to a lot of stakeholders. So there's a lot of Treasury organizations out there, I think, that are trying to push their agendas, but if they better align their the value of the project with other stakeholders beyond just Treasury, they probably would have a more compelling case. And then just one other technology related question that is more of a curiosity thing. I know you've done a lot in terms of technology implementations, but there's probably a lot more that you would like to do. I'm just curious if you see any kind of shortcomings in the market presently with different technologies that are available, or anything that you'd really just like to see kind of come to fruition from a Treasury technology standpoint.
I don't know if I'd call it any shortfalls. If anything, maybe there's just such a broad and abundance of technology out there. It's almost like you could get caught betting on the wrong horse. So you gotta, hopefully you don't latch onto something that's going to disappear in a year or two. And it's hard to stay on top of everything that's new and changing. Looking at things like AI, I mean, at some point in time, there's probably a lot of people using it right now to support decisions or even make decisions. So you really have to stay on top of what's going on and get to that point where you're comfortable with the new technology, and also to the point where it's maybe commoditized, so that's actually affordable for the masses and not just for the the Dow 30 or whatever. So yeah, so it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought you were going to say EBAM. Everybody always brings up EBAM as the technology that
I knew you would bring that one up. I don't want to talk about EBAM anymore. It's such a great idea.
Everybody wishes that one came to fruition one day. All right. I mean, just in general, we talked a lot about having knowledge and how that's a benefit. But if you don't have it and you're going to undertake one of these tech projects, how do you kind of prepare yourself, I guess, right? So what's the right things to do to align yourself internally with either your IT resources to gain that knowledge, or to kind of externally look for a third party, either gain that knowledge directly from your provider itself, who you're buying the product from, or consultants? I guess what would be your suggestions around how to best plug those knowledge gaps if you do have them organizationally?
And that's it's probably unique for every situation, but initially, networking and then starting just with people that you work with, colleagues, not necessarily where you work, but get some feedback from people, find out what they're doing, what they've had luck with or success with. Who they've used in the past. I mean, if you really don't have the internal resources, you probably are going to either going to have to, invest in some education and then bring some people up to speed, which, is always hopefully have people that are interested in that. And it's nice to keep that knowledge in-house permanently. But if not, you might have to look for consultants and or look to your product vendor as a consultant. And that's going to have to be discussions that you have and see exactly, can you get to that comfort level where you feel that you can move forward with them alone, or do you need a third party? It's really whatever's going to give you the comfort that you need to move forward. So you think you're primed for a successful project or implementation.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, particularly around like, if you have the opportunity to gain this knowledge, don't lose it, right? Find somebody internally who really is interested in these projects and get them involved in it so that you can have your in-house expert, right? At the end of the day, when you're all done, that knowledge doesn't leave the organization. So that's something we always suggest during our projects too, is to just have somebody become almost a super user, right? So that once we do roll off the project, you have somebody that can kind of manage things in-house, at least the basic configuration things, and really becomes knowledgeable about those topics on a go-forward basis. So yeah, that's great advice too. Just in general, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the chat here, but it just seems like the technology and then Treasury is kind of adapting the skill set is really what's facilitating this move in Treasury from operational, transactional to more strategic, right? There's automation of manual processes going on. There's better use of data, better aggregation of data, better decision making, ability to leverage more advanced tools like BI tools, artificial intelligence, and things like that. And like you mentioned before, Treasury really becoming this kind of organizational consultant more so than just a transactional type processing center, where they have a seat at the strategic table, really, for a lot of the different objectives that are going on, everything that pertains to cash flow planning or even beyond that, right? So is that something you guys feel like you've achieved at IFAW, is, really getting a good, automation of the operational processes and bringing Treasury to that next kind of strategic level, you think?
We've done a good job of it. We're not as far along as we can be, and that just means there's more to do, and that's something we look forward to accomplishing in the future. But Treasury really is, I think, viewed as just as a real strategic partner, and it can be anything from insurance questions, foreign exchange questions. Really it can come from any department, and it may have absolutely nothing to do with banking, but we do see questions coming in, and they're things that we can help with. So it's I'm really glad that tells people that they're taking a more holistic enterprise sort of wide view of risk management, and in the end, I mean, I see Treasury primarily as a sort of risk management function. Whether it's liquidity or insurable risks and operational risks, and it's glad that others see that as well, and that we're adding value across the organization.
That's great. Yeah, I think we're seeing the same thing in the industry as well, is that Treasury has become this advisor kind of globally to the rest of the organization about how best to execute payments, how to do things securely, how to communicate with the banking partners, owning really the organization's fraud mitigation strategy as well, which is becoming a big thing for Treasury to kind of take on as well, but almost like this global payments process ownership type responsibility without necessarily being in the weeds, more that controls advisor than the actual processor itself. So it's a nice role to see Treasury take on, and yeah, I think that you're right that it's going to continue to kind of grow more and more into more strategic areas, particularly as Treasury gets better at adopting technology and utilizing in some of the ways that we talked about today. So yep. I think with that, we kind of have come to the end of our talk track here in terms of the conversation here. So I think that was a decent point here to end on, in terms of technology really being the facilitator of this strategic shift for Treasury. And so thanks again for everybody for joining today. We're also happy to take any questions you guys might have or that came up during the course of the conversation. I see Jen just rejoined us here, so I'm not sure if maybe we had a couple of questions come in.
Yeah, we had a couple questions roll in. These may have happened a little bit at the beginning and middle of the session. So the first one comes in from Chris, and this could be for either one of you. Can you discuss some fraud prevention best practices?
Yeah, so I could probably take that one, I think. So, we kind of think of like 3 pillars of fraud protection. One is the awareness. That's your education, your awareness of the threats in the market, the opportunities to mitigate those threats, your internal just knowledge sharing and education programs, right? Those are critical components of fraud mitigation. They're your kind of low investment, high impact type activities. And then there's the fraud prevention solutions, which are really, your financial controls. Having a payment process in place, having a way that, all payments get initiated, approved, controls around things like invoices getting into AP. There's a lot of fake invoice attacks going around these days, fake wire instruction change requests and things going around. So having those controls in place at the procurement level, the supply chain level around how that information gets into the system is critical as well. And then really, kind of what we recommend is really kind of centralizing the initiation of payments through a central channel, something like TIS, for example, right? That allows you to put in place consistent approval processes regardless of the point of initiation for those transactions. Goes a long way to be able to institute your financial controls. And then the last piece is really fraud detection, right? So those are your more predictive type softwares that can look holistically across your data set, more proactively identify things that look suspicious, abnormal transactions, things like first-time pay beneficiaries, or an abnormally large payment going out to a beneficiary, or an abnormally large payment going out of a particular subsidiary, for example, right? Flagging those transactions so that your organization can take a closer look at those before they're actually released out to those parties. So we really think of it from those three different pillars there. Sequentially, try to attack them in order, I think, because I think that they layer onto each other nicely. The better you do on the education and prevention part, the less you have to detect, right? And the less false positives you're going to have. So those are always the suggestions that we make for fraud mitigation.
Great, thanks so much. Sorry.
I was just going to say that, I agree. Operationally, policies and procedures are certainly key. I'm a fan of semi-centralizing, if not centralizing, payment processing and control functions that go along with it. And again, systems can help you do that. It's a lot easier to use TIS or any treasury management application to communicate with all your banks and have a single processing or a single set of procedures for entering and approving payments for all of your affiliates or subsidiaries worldwide, instead of having 10 different bank portals that you're signing onto and tokens and lots of different payment entry procedures. And aside from that, then you can get into regionally things like ACH filters and banker or other security vendors products and services that you can use for fraud mitigation as well.
Okay, great. All right, thanks. And the second and last question comes from Mark. Is there a specific resource you use most? I think this might be directed to you, John Kluza.
Resource. I need a little more context. Resource for specifically what? I mean,
there isn't any. Sorry. I think maybe it came in around when you were speaking about how you reach out to communities and the different resources you were using for information. That help?
I'm sorry, actually, I missed the first part of what you said.
Sure thing. This came in around when you were talking about contacting your resources and connecting to different resources and finding out information. So I think that's when this question came in.
Okay, and I'm not sure if that is referring to like stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders. And if that's what it is, not really. I just try and develop relationships across the organization, and really just have people sort of learn to trust you or to reach out to you with questions. So it's nothing, no formal sort of process or hierarchy. It's just a matter of reaching out to people and ensuring they know that it's two-way communication and they can reach out at any point in time if they have questions or want help with anything.
Okay, great. Thanks. No more questions came in. So John, I'll hand it back to you.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so I think that pretty much wraps us up today. Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks again, John Kluza, for joining us today. I think this was a really great conversation. I hope everybody found it really insightful. If anybody has an interest in chatting more, I think that you guys have our contact information, so feel free to reach out. And if not, thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Cheers, bye.